The Mercedes pulled up behind the dumpster where 23-year-old Maya slept every night. The window rolled down, and an elderly woman in pearls asked one question. "Where's the Audi I bought you 3 years ago?" Maya couldn't speak. She just lifted her shirt and showed the scars. It was early morning in South London, and the garbage trucks were already rumbling down the street. Rats scattered as the Mercedes S-Class came to a stop in a neighborhood where cars like that didn't belong. The driver stayed behind the wheel, but the back door opened, and out stepped Eleanor Chun. She was 68 years old, draped in a cream Burberry coat, and her pearls caught the first light of dawn. Next to her stood Marcus, her private investigator, a man who'd spent 3 years chasing ghosts and dead ends. He pointed toward the dumpster behind a closed convenience store, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. There, curled up under a filthy, donated coat, surrounded by plastic bags that held everything she owned, was a young woman who looked more like a skeleton than a human being. Eleanor took 3 steps forward and whispered the name she'd been screaming into the void for 3 years, Maya Lin Chun. Hello, welcome to African Moonlight Tales. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share with your friends, and most important thing, turn your notification bell so you can get informed when I dropped another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. What would you do if your spouse tried to kill you and you survive? Will you take a revenge or disappear forever? To understand how Maya ended up behind that dumpster, you have to go back 4 years to when life was so different it felt like a dream from someone else's life. Back then, Maya was 19 years old, vibrant and beautiful, with a smile that could light up a room and a future so bright it hurt to look at directly. She lived in a Kensington townhouse with 6 bedrooms, a private garden, a home gym, and enough space that you could go days without seeing another person if you wanted to. The house had been in the Chun family for 2 generations, built with money that Eleanor and her late husband had earned through blood, sweat, and a refusal to accept the limitations that society tried to place on Asian immigrants in Britain. Maya's father, David Chun, was Eleanor's only son, and he'd followed in his mother's footsteps by building his own commercial property development company. He was 45 years old, successful, handsome, and devoted to his daughter in a way that made other fathers jealous. Maya had been raised by David alone because her mother, Lily, had died giving birth to her. It was a tragedy that David carried with grace, never making Maya feel guilty for surviving, always making sure she knew how much her mother had wanted her. The 3 of them, Eleanor, David, and Maya, formed a tight unit that felt unbreakable. Summers were spent at Chun Properties headquarters, where Eleanor would teach Maya about business, about negotiation, about the importance of owning property in a country that had spent centuries making it difficult for immigrants to build wealth. Eleanor would sit behind her massive desk with Maya in the chair across from her and say things like, "Never forget where you came from, baby. I grew up in Hong Kong with nothing. Your grandfather and I built this empire with our own hands, and nobody can take that away from us. That's what ownership means. That's what legacy means." Maya absorbed every word like gospel. She was brilliant, a straight-A student at the prestigious Westminster School, a young woman who dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse because she wanted to help children who looked like her, children who deserved the best medical care regardless of their background. When she got accepted to King's College London with a full academic scholarship to study nursing, Eleanor threw a party that had half of London's Asian business elite in attendance. The pride in that room was thick enough to choke on. On Maya's 16th birthday, Eleanor had given her a silver Audi A3 with a giant red bow and an engraved keychain that read, "Drive toward your dreams, grandmother." Maya had cried so hard that her makeup ran, and David had stood there beaming like his heart might burst. That car was more than transportation. It was a symbol of everything they'd built together, everything they believed in, everything they were fighting to preserve. But then 2 years later, when Maya was 18 and freshly enrolled at King's College, David met a woman named Patricia Turner at a charity auction at the Royal Opera House. Patricia was 39 years old, divorced, and she had 2 daughters from her previous marriage. She worked as an executive assistant and presented herself as a woman who was cultured, educated, and refined despite her financial struggles. She talked about how hard it was raising 2 girls alone, how she wanted to give them opportunities but could barely keep the lights on some months. David, who understood single parenting intimately, felt sympathetic. He saw a woman who was doing her best against difficult odds, and his generous heart wanted to help. What he didn't see, what none of them saw until it was too late, was that Patricia Turner was a predator who had been hunting for prey exactly like David Chun. Patricia had done her research. She knew about the Chun family wealth, about the property empire, about the Kensington townhouse and the trust funds and the legacy. She positioned herself at that charity auction specifically because she knew David would be there, and she crafted her entire persona to appeal to his values and his vulnerabilities. The courtship was a whirlwind. Flowers arrived at David's office every week. Weekend trips to Bath and Edinburgh were planned with perfect attention to his tastes. Dinners at expensive restaurants always ended with Patricia insisting on splitting the check, even though everyone knew she couldn't afford it, which made David feel like she wasn't after his money. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and David fell for every move. 8 months later, they were married in a small ceremony that Patricia insisted on keeping intimate. She said she didn't want a big production, that she just wanted to start their new life together without fanfare. What she really wanted was to avoid too much scrutiny, too many people asking questions, too many background checks. Eleanor attended the wedding, but she pulled Maya aside beforehand and said something that would echo in Maya's mind for years afterward. Something about that woman doesn't sit right with me. Watch yourself, baby. I've been in business long enough to know when someone's running a game. But Maya, who loved her father and wanted him to be happy, brushed off the warning. She told herself that her grandmother was just being overprotective, that Patricia deserved a chance, that blending families was always awkward at first. Patricia moved into the Kensington townhouse with her 2 daughters, Charlotte and Emma, and the cracks started showing immediately. Charlotte was 20 years old, pretty in a harsh way, and she had an entitlement problem that manifested in constant complaints. She was angry that her bedroom was smaller than Maya's, angry that she had to share a bathroom with her sister, angry that David's late wife's portrait still hung in the hallway. Emma was 17, quieter than her sister, but no less calculating. She spent her first week in the house cataloging every expensive item Maya owned, like she was taking inventory. Both girls had a habit of borrowing Maya's clothes and returning them stained or torn. They'd use up her expensive makeup and perfume without asking, and when confronted, they'd shrug and say, "We're family now. What's yours is ours." Maya was still living in student accommodation at King's College, only coming home on weekends, so she tried to let the small violations slide. She told herself it was an adjustment period, that things would settle down once everyone found their rhythm. But the small cruelties kept escalating. Patricia started redecorating, which really meant erasing every trace of Lily from the house. Photos disappeared. Belongings were donated to charity. The portrait in the hallway was replaced with a generic landscape painting. When Maya protested to her father, David said, "They're adjusting, sweetheart. It's hard blending families. Be patient." What none of them realized was that Patricia was executing a long-term plan that had been in motion since the day she said, "I do." She was studying the family dynamics, identifying weaknesses, building leverage, and positioning herself for the moment when everything would shift in her favor. That moment came on a rainy November night when David was driving home from a business trip to Manchester. A lorry ran a red light and crashed into his car at an intersection. He died instantly. The police called at 11 p.m., and Patricia answered the phone. She screamed dramatically, making sure Charlotte and Emma heard her, making sure the neighbors heard her, making sure everyone would remember her performance. Then she called Maya with a voice that was cold and flat, stripped of the fake warmth she usually performed. "Your father is dead. Get home now." No comfort, no compassion, just a command. Maya drove home in her Audi, crying so hard she could barely see the road, nearly crashing 3 times because her body was shaking with sobs. When she arrived at the townhouse, she found Patricia already on the phone with lawyers. There were no tears on Patricia's face, just focus, just strategy, just the cold calculation of a woman who had been waiting for this moment. Maya tried to call her grandmother, desperate for someone to hold her while she fell apart, but Patricia had already called Eleanor first. Eleanor was in Singapore closing a major business deal, and the earliest she could return to London was 2 weeks away because of connecting flights and business complications. On the phone, Eleanor was frantic. "Baby, I'm coming home as fast as I can. Are you okay? Is Patricia taking care of you?" Patricia, standing close enough to hear both sides of the conversation, took the phone from Maya's hand and said in a voice dripping with false concern, "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'll handle everything here. I'm his wife. I've got this." Those 2 weeks between David's death and Eleanor's return were when Patricia made her move. She took complete control of the funeral arrangements, spending David's money on an elaborate service with an expensive casket and printed programs that featured photos of him with Patricia and her daughters, with Maya barely visible in the background. She went through David's office systematically, accessing his computer, his files, his financial records, learning exactly how much money was in play and how she could get her hands on it. And she started isolating Maya, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of friends and neighbors, telling anyone who would listen that the poor girl was so devastated that she wasn't thinking clearly, that she was becoming difficult to manage. The week after the funeral, the family gathered in a lawyer's office for the reading of David's will. The lawyer, an older British man who'd known the Chun family for decades, read the document with appropriate solemnity. David had left the house to Patricia, as was standard for a surviving spouse. He'd left Maya a trust fund of £400,000, accessible when she turned 25, with all university expenses paid through graduation. It was a generous inheritance, carefully structured to protect a young woman who was still learning how the world worked. But there was more. Eleanor had set up separate accounts for Maya that existed outside of David's estate. There was the Audi, which had been a gift years earlier and was titled in Maya's name. And there was a university fund of £150,000 that Eleanor had deposited into an account that only Maya could access. The lawyer made a point of emphasizing this distinction. These are direct gifts from Mrs. Eleanor Chun. They are not part of David's estate, and they are solely for Maya's benefit. Patricia nodded along, squeezing Maya's hand in a gesture that looked supportive but felt like a threat. Her grip was too tight, her nails digging into Maya's palm hard enough to leave marks. After the meeting, in the car park where no one else could hear, Patricia dropped her mask for just a moment. "Quite the golden girl, aren't you? Trust fund and grandmother's money. Must be nice." Maya went back to King's College, trying to hold herself together, but grief doesn't follow a schedule. She couldn't concentrate in lectures, couldn't focus on exams, couldn't remember why any of it mattered when her father was gone and the world felt like it had collapsed. She failed 2 exams for the first time in her life, and her lecturers, who knew about her father's death, offered her deferrals and extensions. But the failures felt like confirmation of what she'd been afraid of her whole life, that without her father, she was going to fall apart. That's when she got a call from a neighbor, an older woman who'd lived next door to the Chens for 15 years. "Love, I saw charity vans at your house today. They were taking boxes and boxes of stuff. I thought you should know." Maya's blood went cold. She jumped in her Audi and drove to Kensington, her heart pounding, her mind racing through everything she'd left at the house. When she got there, she found Patricia in the living room, looking calm and composed. Maya demanded to know what had been donated, and Patricia rattled off a list that made Maya's knees buckle. All of her childhood belongings, photo albums with pictures of her mother's jewelry that David had carefully saved for her, awards and certificates from academic competitions, yearbooks, memory boxes that held everything from her past. All of it gone, donated to some charity shop where strangers were probably already rifling through the remnants of her entire childhood. When Maya confronted Patricia, the woman didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She said, "I'm grieving too. I needed a clear space. All of that stuff was triggering me. You're being selfish. You're not the only one who lost him." It was a perfectly crafted response designed to make Maya feel guilty for her own pain. And it worked. Maya backed down, too exhausted and grief-stricken to fight. She tried calling her grandmother, but Patricia had been screening the calls, telling Eleanor that Maya was going through a phase and needed space to process. When Maya finally got through to her grandmother by calling the Chun Properties office line directly, Eleanor was furious. "I'm coming home early. Pack your things. You're moving in with me." But Eleanor was still 3 days away, and Patricia knew she had to move fast. The next violation came quickly. Maya came home for the weekend to find that her childhood bedroom had been redecorated for Emma. All of Maya's remaining belongings had been shoved into boxes in the garage. Her posters were gone. Her furniture had been replaced. Her closet was full of Emma's clothes. When she protested, Patricia said, "You're barely here anyway. You live at university. Emma needs the bigger room for her things. Stop being so territorial." Charlotte and Emma started wearing Maya's designer clothes openly, taking her expensive makeup, using her perfume like it belonged to them. When Maya objected, they'd laugh and say, "Mom said we're all family now. Sharing is caring." But the real nightmare started 2 nights before Eleanor was scheduled to return to London. Maya was sleeping in the garage in what had basically become a storage room, and she woke up to the sound of arguing. Patricia and her daughters were in the kitchen, and their voices were loud enough to carry through the walls. Maya crept closer to listen, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Patricia was saying, "That little brat has £150,000 sitting in an account, and we're supposed to struggle. I didn't marry David and put up with his precious daughter for 3 years to walk away with nothing." Charlotte asked, "Can't you access it?" Patricia responded, "Not without her signature. But I'm working on it. I've got papers drawn up, power of attorney forms that'll give me control of everything. Once she signs, we can drain that account and disappear before Eleanor even knows what happened." Maya pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Everything suddenly made sense. The quick courtship, the rushed marriage, the fake sweetness, the calculated cruelties. Patricia had married David for money, and now that he was dead, she was going after everything she could get her hands on. And Maya was the only thing standing in her way. The next morning, Patricia was overly sweet at breakfast, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. She said, "Maya, honey, I know we've had some tension. I want us to start over. I want us to be a real family." She slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are just formalities, power of attorney documents that'll help me manage your accounts while you're grieving and focusing on university. Your grandmother suggested it. She thinks it would be helpful." It was a lie so blatant that Maya almost laughed. Eleanor would never suggest giving Patricia control of anything. Maya pushed the papers back across the table and said, "No, I'm not signing anything, and I'm moving out when my grandmother gets here in 2 days." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Patricia's smile disappeared, replaced by something ugly and raw. "Sign the papers, Maya." Her voice had gone flat. All pretense of warmth evaporated. Maya stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "No, and I'm calling my grandmother right now to tell her what you're really after." She turned to leave, but Charlotte and Emma were suddenly blocking the doorway. They'd been standing in the hall, listening, waiting for their cue. Maya tried to push past them, but Charlotte grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Where do you think you're going?" What happened next would become a nightmare that Maya couldn't escape even years later. They dragged Maya back into the kitchen. Patricia locked the door, and for the next hour, they made sure Maya understood exactly how powerless she was. Patricia hit her first, an open-handed slap that snapped Maya's head to the side and left her ears ringing. Then Charlotte joined in, punching Maya in the stomach hard enough to knock the wind out of her. Emma held Maya's arms behind her back, while Patricia went to the stove and turned on the burner. She lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and then pressed the burning end into Maya's ribs. The scream that tore out of Maya's throat was inhuman, a sound of pure agony that she didn't know she was capable of making. Patricia did it again, and again, and again. Each burn was accompanied by words that were almost worse than the pain. "You think you're better than us? You think your grandmother's money makes you special? You're nothing. You're nobody. And when I'm done with you, everyone will know it." They took turns after that. A belt across her back, a knife, shallow cuts on her stomach, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but enough to scar. Kicks to her ribs that broke bone. Through it all, Patricia kept asking, "Will you sign the papers now?" Maya refused. She didn't know where the strength came from, but she kept saying no until her voice gave out and all she could do was shake her head. Finally, when Maya was barely conscious, they dragged her to the basement and locked her in. It was cold down there, concrete floors and unfinished walls, with only a thin blanket and a bottle of water that Patricia tossed down the stairs like she was feeding a dog. Maya lay on that floor for 3 days. She could hear them upstairs living their lives, laughing, watching television, eating meals. Occasionally, Emma would come down with a piece of bread or another bottle of water, just enough to keep Maya alive. On the 3rd day, Maya noticed that one of the basement windows had a broken latch. It was small, barely big enough for her to squeeze through, but it was her only chance. She waited until the middle of the night when the house was quiet, and then she pushed herself through that window, scraping her already injured body against the frame, leaving skin and blood on the concrete. She dropped onto the ground outside, barefoot and wearing only the pajamas she'd been sleeping in when this nightmare started, and then she ran. She ran through the Kensington neighborhood in the dark, her broken ribs screaming with every step, her feet bleeding on the pavement. She knocked on neighbors' doors, but no one answered. Rich neighborhoods have high fences and privacy hedges and security systems, and no one wants to deal with someone who looks like trouble. She finally made it to a main road and flagged down a car, but the driver took one look at her, bloody, bruised, wild-eyed, and sped away. Eventually, she walked all the way to South London, a journey that took hours and left her feet shredded and her body on the verge of collapse. She found a payphone outside a petrol station and called the police. An officer arrived 20 minutes later, and Maya tried to explain what had happened. But when he ran her name in the system, his whole demeanor changed. "You're the girl who stole from her stepmother and had drugs in her car." Maya felt the ground shift beneath her. "What? No, I didn't." But the officer cut her off. "There's a report here. Theft, drug possession, and a restraining order. You're supposed to stay away from the family home." Patricia had been busy during those 3 days. She filed a police report claiming that Maya had stolen £8,000 in cash and attacked her. She'd planted drugs in the Audi and called the police to report it. And she'd gotten a restraining order granted in Maya's absence, claiming that Maya was violent and unstable. It was a perfect trap built with lies and false evidence. And now Maya was standing in front of a police officer who already believed she was the criminal. "Go home and deal with your family issues," the officer said. "I don't want to see you again, or I'll arrest you for violating that restraining order." Maya wanted to scream that she couldn't go home, that home was where people had tortured her. But the words wouldn't come. She was too exhausted, too broken, too defeated. So she walked away from that petrol station with nowhere to go and no one to call. She spent her first night on the streets behind a closed restaurant, curled up next to a dumpster, and cried until she had no tears left. The next day, she tried to get help. She walked to Chin Properties headquarters, but security wouldn't let her in. She looked homeless. She had no ID. And when she tried to explain that she was Eleanor Chin's granddaughter, they thought she was running a scam. "Mrs. Chun is out of the country," they said, "and we don't let random people claim to be family." They escorted her out of the building like she was rubbish. She walked to King's College, hoping that someone there would recognize her, would help her, would believe her. But when she got to the administration building, she found out that she'd been withdrawn from university. Patricia had called claiming to be Maya's legal guardian and said that Maya was dropping out due to personal issues. The financial aid office confirmed that the semester fees had gone unpaid and her scholarship had been revoked for failing to meet academic standards after she'd missed finals. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of was gone. She tried to access her bank account, hoping to at least have money for food and shelter, but the account had been frozen. Patricia had reported it as compromised and had it locked pending an investigation. Maya had nothing. No money, no ID, no phone, no home, no education, no family except a grandmother who was on the other side of the world and didn't know she was missing. The first week on the streets was a crash course in survival. She learned which hostels had open beds and which ones had waiting lists months long. She learned which public parks would let you sleep without the police bothering you, and which ones would have you arrested for trespassing. She learned how to spot the predators, the men who drove slowly through neighborhoods where homeless women gathered, offering money for things that Maya refused to even think about. She learned how to make herself invisible, how to avoid eye contact, how to move through the world like a ghost. She found a spot behind a dumpster in South London, tucked away from the main street where the owner of the convenience store didn't call the police as long as she stayed out of sight. She met other people living on the streets, and some of them were kind. A woman named Rose, who was in her 50s and had lost everything to medical bills after a cancer diagnosis, took Maya under her wing. Rose shared food when she had it, showed Maya where the clean public toilets were, and taught her how to wash up in petrol station sinks without getting kicked out. "Baby girl, what happened to you?" Rose asked one night when they were huddled together behind the dumpster, trying to stay warm. Maya couldn't answer. The shame was too heavy. How could she explain that she'd gone from a Kensington townhouse to the streets in less than 2 weeks? How could she admit that she'd had everything and lost it all? So she just shook her head and said, "Family stuff." And Rose, who understood that sometimes the past was too painful to speak out loud, didn't push. Maya got a job at a fast food restaurant where the manager paid her under the table. She made £30 or £40 a day, which was barely enough for food, and she saved every penny she could because she thought that maybe eventually she'd have enough to get an ID and start rebuilding. But the system was designed to keep people trapped. You needed a birth certificate to get an ID, and the birth certificate cost £25. You needed an address to get an ID, but you couldn't get an address without money for rent, and you couldn't get a rental without an ID. It was a circular trap that had no exit, and Maya was caught in the center of it. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Maya's body, which had never fully healed from Patricia's attack, developed chronic pain. Her ribs ached constantly. The cigarette burned scarred over, leaving marks that would never fade. She got new injuries on the streets, bruises from fights over food, cuts from broken glass, infections that she couldn't afford to treat. Her mental health deteriorated. The depression was so heavy that some days she couldn't get out from behind the dumpster. She'd just lie there staring at the sky, wondering why she was still fighting to survive when survival felt like torture. She watched other young women on the streets disappear into trafficking rings or drug addiction, or just vanish one day and never come back. On her 21st birthday, Maya woke up behind the dumpster to the sound of garbage trucks and realized that no one in the world knew or cared that she'd survived another year. There was no cake, no candles, no singing, just another day of hunger and fear and shame. Rose had gotten into a transitional housing program a few months earlier, and before she left, she tried to get Maya into the program too. But there was only space for one person, and Rose had prioritized herself because she was older and sicker. Maya didn't blame her. She would have done the same thing. But it meant she was alone again, with no one to share the burden of survival. She made friends with a cook at a nearby cafe who would sneak her leftover food. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a daughter who attended University College London. "You remind me of her," he said one day. "Smart, beautiful. You should be in university, not out here." Maya smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I should be a lot of things." She didn't tell him that she would have graduated from King's College this year, that she would have been applying to nursing programs, that she would have been Maya Chan, RN, instead of just another invisible homeless girl that people stepped over on the pavement. She saw her grandmother's empire everywhere. Chin property signs were all over London, announcing new developments and luxury flats and commercial spaces. Every time Maya saw that name, she felt a stab of pain so acute it took her breath away. Her grandmother was so close, probably working in her office just a few miles away, and yet she might as well have been on another planet. Maya assumed that Eleanor had stopped looking for her, that she'd believed Patricia's lies about the drug dealer and the running away. She assumed that Eleanor had moved on, had decided that Maya wasn't worth the trouble, had written her off as a lost cause. What Maya didn't know was that Eleanor had never stopped searching. From the moment Eleanor had returned to London and discovered Maya was missing, she'd been frantic. She'd gone to the Kensington townhouse and confronted Patricia, who'd performed her concerned stepmother act perfectly. Maya was struggling with grief, Patricia had said with fake tears. She got involved with some bad people. There were drugs in her car. She attacked me when I tried to intervene. I had to get a restraining order for my own safety. I think she ran off with her boyfriend. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I tried to help her. Eleanor hadn't believed a word of it, but she had no proof. Patricia had created a perfect paper trail of lies. Police reports, restraining orders, witness statements from Charlotte and Emma. Eleanor had hired private investigators who'd followed false leads across 3 counties. She'd filed missing persons reports and called in favors from police contacts and business connections. She'd offered reward money and put up posters and done everything in her power to find her granddaughter. She confronted Patricia multiple times, threatening legal action, demanding answers, but Patricia had lawyers and a victim narrative that was airtight. Eleanor had spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on investigators who kept coming back empty-handed. Every lead went cold. Every tip turned out to be nothing. She'd aged 10 years and 3. The stress had turned her hair completely white. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't focus on business. All she could think about was Maya, somewhere out there, possibly in danger, possibly dead. And Marcus, her lead investigator, had finally gotten a tip from a homeless outreach worker. There's a young Asian woman in South London, early 20s, calls herself M, has scars all over her body, speaks like she's educated, and she's been sleeping behind a dumpster for the past 2 years. Matches your description. Marcus had staked out the location for 3 days to confirm before he called Eleanor. When he finally sent her a photo of the woman sleeping behind the dumpster, Eleanor had broken down, crying for the first time since her son's funeral. "That's my baby," she'd sobbed into the phone. "Oh God, that's my baby." And she'd gotten into her Mercedes immediately, not caring that it was barely dawn, not caring that South London wasn't a neighborhood where cars like hers belonged, not caring about anything except getting to Maya as fast as possible. Which brought them back to this moment. Maya, in her grandmother's arms, wrapped in a blanket, being helped into the back of the Mercedes while Marcus called ahead to the hospital. Eleanor sat next to Maya, holding her hand, and the whole drive there, she whispered promises. "I've got you now, baby. I've got you. And I'm going to make them pay for what they did. I'm going to burn their whole world down." They went straight to St. Thomas Hospital, where Dr. Patel, the Chun family physician for 30 years, was waiting. He did a full examination that took hours and documented everything. Malnutrition severe enough to have caused organ damage. Untreated broken ribs that had healed incorrectly and would require surgery to fix. Cigarette burns that were clearly intentional, not accidental. Knife scars that formed patterns consistent with torture, not self-harm. PTSD symptoms that were severe enough to require immediate psychiatric intervention. Dr. Patel took photographs, wrote detailed notes, and when he was done, he sat down with Eleanor and said, "This is a criminal case. This is assault, battery, torture, and attempted murder. We need to report this to the police immediately." Eleanor's face was stone. "We will. But I'm handling this my way first. Those people are going to wish the police got to them before I did." She called Marcus, who was already working. While Maya was sedated and finally sleeping in a clean bed for the first time in 3 years, Marcus was digging through records and finding evidence that would destroy Patricia Turner's entire world. He discovered that Patricia had sold the Audi 2 days after David's funeral for £28,000 cash. He found forged documents where Patricia had faked Maya's signature on power of attorney papers and drained the £150,000 university fund systematically over 3 years. He found bank statements showing how that money had been spent. Cars for Charlotte and Emma, designer clothes, expensive holidays, and payments toward Patricia's gambling debts. Marcus also found Patricia's criminal history under her maiden name, fraud, identity theft, a restraining order from her first husband who'd accused her of stealing money from their joint accounts. David had never known any of this because Patricia had used a fake background check service and lied about her past. Charlotte had an arrest record too, assault and shoplifting from when she was 18. The whole family was built on lies and violence, and David had walked right into their trap because he'd been lonely and kind and assumed that people were fundamentally good. Marcus also discovered that Patricia had filed a false police report the day after Maya escaped, claiming that Maya had threatened her. She'd gotten a restraining order granted by telling a magistrate that Maya was violent and dangerous. The order had been issued in Maya's absence, without her knowledge, which explained why the police hadn't helped her. There was a warrant out for violating a restraining order that Maya didn't even know existed. It was a perfect legal trap designed to keep Maya from getting help, from going to the authorities, from having any recourse at all. Patricia had thought of everything, but she hadn't counted on Eleanor Chun. When Marcus presented his findings, Eleanor called her lawyers, a team that included the best criminal barristers and civil litigation specialists in London. I want criminal charges filed. Assault, battery, fraud, theft, forgery, false imprisonment, torture, and attempted murder. I want them arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But before that, Eleanor wanted them to feel what Maya had felt. She wanted them to lose everything. So she made some calls. Chun Properties owned the building where Charlotte worked as a receptionist, and Eleanor had her fired that afternoon. She pulled strings at London Metropolitan University, where one of her foundations had funded a scholarship that Emma had fraudulently obtained using stolen information from Maya's academic records. Emma was expelled within 24 hours. Eleanor had their bank accounts frozen pending fraud investigations. She had their credit cards canceled. She had Patricia's car, which had been purchased with money stolen from Maya, repossessed while Patricia was at the supermarket. Within one day, Patricia and her daughters went from living comfortably off stolen money to having nothing. Their phones started ringing with collection agencies. Their electricity got shut off because they couldn't pay the bill. Their entire world came crashing down, and they had no idea what was happening or who was behind it. Patricia tried calling lawyers, but no one would take her case. Once they heard the name Eleanor Chun, they declined. She tried going to the police, but the police were suddenly very interested in the fraud allegations against her. She tried accessing money from David's estate, but Eleanor's lawyers had already filed paperwork freezing everything pending litigation. Patricia was trapped, and she didn't even fully understand how tightly the net had closed around her. A week later, when Maya was finally conscious and lucid, she woke up in a bedroom that she didn't recognize. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Who had taken her? Was she in danger? But then she saw her grandmother sitting in a chair beside the bed, and reality came flooding back. Grandmother. Her voice was hoarse from disuse. Eleanor smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Maya had seen in years. I'm here, baby. I'm right here, and I'm never letting you go again. Maya started crying. I'm so sorry. I lost everything you gave me. The car, the money, the education. I failed you. Eleanor moved to the bed and gathered Maya in her arms. Hush now. You didn't lose anything. It was stolen from you, and we're taking it all back. She explained everything that Marcus had discovered, and Maya listened in numb shock. Patricia had planned the entire thing from the beginning. She'd targeted David specifically, married him for his money, waited for him to die, and then eliminated the only obstacle between her and the Chin fortune. She thought she'd won. Eleanor said. She thought she'd gotten away with it. But she forgot one thing. I built an empire in this city, and I don't lose. 2 weeks later, Maya was strong enough to face Patricia. She told Eleanor that she needed to do this, that she needed to look her abuser in the eye and show her that she'd survived. Eleanor arranged a meeting at the lawyer's office, and when Patricia arrived, she was still arrogant. She brought her own solicitor, a duty solicitor who looked overworked and underpaid, and she walked in like she was about to negotiate a settlement. But then she saw Maya sitting at the conference table, clean and healthy and very much alive, and the color drained from her face. She tried to recover, tried to put on the concerned stepmother act one more time. Maya, thank God. We've been so worried. But Maya cut her off. She stood up, walked around the table, and lifted her shirt to show the scars. You did this to me. You and your daughters held me down and burned me with cigarettes because I wouldn't sign your papers. Patricia started to protest, but Marcus pressed play on a recording. It was audio from a phone call between Patricia, Charlotte, and Emma from 2 years ago, discussing how they taught that little brat a lesson and how they needed to make sure she never came back. The recording was damning. Patricia's solicitor stood up, said, I'm withdrawing from this case, and walked out of the room without another word. Patricia's mask finally cracked. You can't prove anything. I'm his wife. David left me that house. Eleanor leaned forward, and her voice was colder than Maya had ever heard it. The house David left you was paid for with a loan from Chin Properties. I own the note, and I'm calling it due. You have 30 days to vacate, or I'll have the bailiffs remove you myself." Patricia's eyes went wild. "You can't do this." But Eleanor wasn't done. Criminal charges are being filed today. Assault, battery, kidnapping, fraud, theft, forgery, identity theft, and attempted murder. My lawyers estimate 15 to 20 years in prison for each of you." Marcus added, "Charlotte and Emma are being arrested as we speak. Officers are at their locations now." And right on cue, Patricia's phone started buzzing with calls from her daughters. Patricia was arrested that afternoon at the Kensington townhouse, let out in handcuffs while news crews filmed. Marcus had tipped off the media, and the story went viral within hours. Billionaire's granddaughter found after 3 years homeless. Stepfamily arrested for torture and fraud. The community was outraged. The comment sections were filled with people demanding the harshest sentences possible. The trial happened 6 months later, and it was a media circus. Maya took the stand and testified about everything. The abuse, the torture, the 3 years on the streets, the system failures that had left her invisible and voiceless. She showed her scars to the jury, and several people in the courtroom started crying. The defense tried to paint Maya as a troubled young woman who'd made bad choices, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, audio recordings, medical documentation, CCTV footage from the bank showing Patricia cashing checks that didn't belong to her. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing was swift. Patricia got 18 years. Charlotte got 12. Emma got 10. The judge, an older woman who'd worked her way up from duty solicitor to the bench, looked at Patricia with pure disgust. "You took a young woman who had everything ahead of her and tried to destroy her for money. You tortured her. You threw her into the streets like rubbish. And you did it all without an ounce of remorse. You deserve every single day of this sentence." As Patricia was led away screaming, Maya felt something inside her shift. It wasn't closure exactly. The pain didn't disappear, but it was acknowledgement. The system that had failed her had finally seen her, believed her, and acted. The healing process was slow and painful and nonlinear. Maya moved into Eleanor's estate permanently, and her grandmother made sure she had access to the best therapists, doctors, and support systems available. 3 times a week, Maya sat in therapy sessions where she slowly unpacked the trauma. She did physical therapy for her injuries, and while the pain would never fully go away, it became manageable. She joined a support group for abuse survivors, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Eleanor was patient and loving and present in a way that saved Maya's life. On the bad days when Maya couldn't get out of bed, Eleanor would sit with her and say, "Healing isn't linear, baby. Some days you'll feel strong. Some days you'll feel broken. Both are okay." And slowly, painfully, the light started coming back to Maya's eyes. A year after her rescue, Maya was ready to think about her future again. Eleanor asked her gently, "What do you want, baby?" No pressure, no expectations, just dreams. Maya thought about it for a long time before answering. "I still want to be a nurse. I still want to help children. I know I'm behind. I know it'll take longer now. But I think I need to do this for me and for the girl I was before all of this happened." Eleanor smiled and made some calls. King's College London welcomed Maya back with open arms. The dean personally apologized for not investigating when Maya had disappeared, and the university reinstated her full scholarship. Her credits were honored, and she was able to enroll as a second-year student. At 24 years old, Maya walked back onto campus, and it felt like coming home. She threw herself into her studies with a focus that surprised even her. She made the dean's list. She joined study groups, and she discovered a new passion: pediatric trauma nursing. She wanted to help children who'd experienced violence, who'd been broken by the people who were supposed to protect them. Maya also never forgot Rose, the homeless woman who'd shared food and taught her how to survive on the streets. Marcus located Rose in a transitional housing program, and Maya went to visit her with bags full of groceries, clothes, and practical supplies. When Rose opened the door and saw Maya standing there, healthy and whole, She burst into tears. "Baby girl, look at you. I knew you were special. I knew you'd make it out." Eleanor hired Rose personally to work at Chim Properties. Rose became an advocate for homeless women, using her own experience to help others navigate the system. Maya also created a foundation called Second Chance Futures. It was designed to help young people who'd experienced homelessness get access to education. The foundation provided housing, tuition assistance, counseling, job training, and mentorship. Eleanor funded it generously with a £10 million initial investment, and within the first year, they'd helped 50 students. Maya graduated from King's College with honors. Eleanor was in the front row, crying tears of pride. During her nursing rotations, Maya saw children who reminded her of herself, broken, scared, hurt by people who should have protected them. She treated each one with dignity and compassion, and she became their advocate. 5 years after her rescue, when Maya was 28 years old and thriving as a registered nurse, she got a call about a young woman found behind the same dumpster. She was 19, injured, and refusing help. Maya drove to South London, back to the spot that still haunted her nightmares. When she saw the girl curled up behind the dumpster, she felt like she was looking at her own ghost. She approached slowly, hands visible. "Hey, my name is Maya. I used to sleep right where you are." The girl looked up, eyes full of suspicion and fear. Maya sat down on the ground beside her. "I know you don't trust anyone. I know you think no one cares. I know you feel invisible." The girl's lip started trembling. Maya took her hand. "Come with me. Let's get you somewhere safe, get you fed, and figure this out together. You don't have to be alone anymore." And in that moment, Maya understood her purpose. This was why she'd survived. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories need to be told, and your support helps us continue sharing them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have resources, donate to homeless youth programs in your city. Right now, thousands of young people are living the nightmare that Maya survived. Comment below and tell me, what would you do if you found your loved one living on the streets? This is more than entertainment. This is a call to action. Everyone deserves dignity and love. Real love never stops looking. Until next time, remember that the measure of our humanity is how we treat people when they have nothing left to offer us. Peace.